There are places in America where the land remembers. Where the soil holds secrets so deep, so ancient, that even the wind seems afraid to whisper their names. What you are about to hear is one such secret. A story pulled from the heartland, from beneath the swaying corn of Nebraska, where something hungry waited in the dark for 80 long years. And when the feeding stopped, it woke up. Marcus Whitmore had not thought about his great-aunt Eleanor in over 20 years. She had been a ghost even when she was alive, a faded photograph in a dusty album, a name mentioned in hushed tones at Thanksgiving dinners before his mother would quickly change the subject. So when the letter arrived from a law firm in Grand Island, Nebraska, informing him that Eleanor Whitmore had passed away at the age of 93 and left him her entire estate, Marcus felt more confusion than grief. He was 34 years old, recently divorced, and drowning in the gray mediocrity of his accounting job in Chicago. The inheritance seemed almost laughable at first. A 200-acre farm in the middle of nowhere, a crumbling Victorian farmhouse, and whatever mysteries an old woman he barely knew had left behind. His plan was simple. Drive out, assess the property, sign whatever papers needed signing, and sell the whole thing to the highest bidder before the first frost. The drive from Chicago took nearly 7 hours, and with each passing mile the world seemed to shrink. The highways gave way to county roads, and the county roads surrendered to gravel paths that cut through endless fields of corn standing tall and golden under the September sun. His GPS lost signal 30 miles outside of town, but he didn't need it. The directions the lawyer had provided were simple enough. Follow the old county route until you see the mailbox with the white crow painted on it. Marcus spotted it just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. The mailbox stood crooked and weathered, the white crow barely visible beneath decades of rust and neglect. He turned onto the dirt road that led toward the property, and that was when he saw the first gift. It sat at the edge of the property line, right where the gravel met the dirt, a mason jar filled with golden honey, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, and a package of raw meat secured in brown butcher paper. Marcus stopped his car and stared at it, unsure of what to make of the strange offering. Perhaps it was a welcoming gesture from the neighbors, a rural custom he was unfamiliar with. He left it there and continued toward the house. The farmhouse rose from the earth like something that had grown rather than been built. 3 stories of faded white wood, black shutters hanging at odd angles, and a wraparound porch that sagged in the middle as though exhausted from standing so long. The windows reflected the dying sunlight like hollow eyes, and Marcus could not shake the feeling that the house was watching him, studying him, measuring him against some invisible standard. He spent the first night in a motel back in town, unable to bring himself to sleep within those walls. But the next morning, armed with coffee and false courage, he returned to begin the work of sorting through his great-aunt's belongings. The inside of the house was frozen in time. Furniture from the 1940s, wallpaper that had yellowed into the color of old bones, and photographs that lined the hallways like a museum of forgotten faces. Marcus recognized none of them except for one. It hung at the end of the upstairs corridor, a portrait of Eleanor Whitmore in her younger years. She stood in front of this very house, her expression neither happy nor sad, but something else entirely. Something that looked almost like resignation. It was on the second day that Marcus noticed the pattern with the gifts. Each morning, new offerings appeared at the property line. Jars of preserves, cuts of meat, fresh vegetables, and once, a live chicken in a wooden cage. He finally spotted the source, an old pickup truck that would slow down at the edge of the property, an arm extending from the window to place the items carefully on the ground before speeding away without ever crossing onto the land itself. Marcus drove into town that afternoon, determined to thank his mysterious benefactors and perhaps learn more about the aunt he never knew. The town of Hollow Creek was small, no more than a few hundred souls, with a main street that consisted of a general store, a diner, and a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. When Marcus entered the diner and introduced himself as Eleanor Whitmore's great-nephew, the silence that fell over the room was immediate and absolute. The locals were polite but guarded. They spoke of Eleanor in reverent tones, calling her a good woman, a devoted woman, someone who understood duty. But when Marcus asked about the gifts, about why no one ever came onto the property, their eyes would drift toward the windows and their answers would dissolve into mumbles about respecting tradition and keeping promises. It was the old man at the counter who finally said something useful. His name was Harold, and he had known Eleanor for 60 years. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of coffee and tobacco, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Your aunt kept something contained, son. Something that's been on that land since before the first settlers broke ground. She made a deal with it, same as her mother did and her mother before that. You feed it and it stays below. You stop feeding it? Harold's eyes grew distant, haunted by memories he refused to share. There's a reason that farmhouse is still standing when every other homestead from that era has crumbled to dust. Something protects it. Something that demands payment. Marcus dismissed the old man's words as rural superstition, the kind of folklore that takes root in isolated communities where the nights are long and the entertainment is scarce. But that night, as he finally forced himself to sleep in his gray-tant's bedroom, he heard it for the first time. A scratching. It came from somewhere beneath the house, a rhythmic, patient scratching like fingernails dragging across wood. Marcus lay frozen in his bed, his heart pounding against his ribs, telling himself it was mice, it was the house settling, it was anything other than what his primal brain was screaming at him. The scratching continued for exactly 1 hour, and then it stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like the world had ceased to exist. The next morning Marcus found the cellar door. It was hidden beneath a rug in the kitchen, a heavy oak door set into the floor and secured by a padlock so old and rusted it crumbled in his hands when he touched it. But it wasn't the door that made his blood run cold. It was the marks on the wood, deep gouges carved into the surface, not from the inside trying to get out, but from the outside as though something had been desperately trying to get in. He lifted the door and stared into the darkness below. Stone steps descended into nothing, into a blackness so complete that his flashlight seemed to be swallowed by it. The smell that rose from the depths was unlike anything Marcus had ever encountered. Wet earth and copper and something sweet, something that reminded him of rotting flowers. He should have closed the door. He should have driven back to Chicago and never looked back. But there was something in that darkness that called to him, that whispered his name in a voice that sounded almost like his mother's, almost like comfort, almost like home. Marcus descended. The cellar was larger than the house above it, a cavernous space carved from the earth itself with walls that glistened with moisture and symbols etched into the stone, symbols that hurt to look at, that seemed to writhe and shift in the beam of his flashlight. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, and upon the altar sat Eleanor's journal. Her handwriting was neat and precise, a record of 80 years of devotion. She wrote of the covenant, of the thing that had lived beneath the land since before human memory, of the price that must be paid to keep it sleeping. Every night at midnight she would descend to this chamber and leave an offering of meat upon the altar. Every night for 80 years she had performed this ritual without fail, and in return the crops grew strong, the house remained standing, and the darkness stayed where it belonged. The final entry was dated 3 days before her death. "I am tired," Eleanor had written. "I have searched for years for someone to take my place, but there is no one left who believes, no one left who understands. My body is failing and soon the feedings will stop. I can only pray that whoever inherits this burden will find this journal before it is too late. I can hear it waking. God forgive me." Marcus looked up from the journal, and that was when he realized the scratching had started again. But it wasn't coming from below anymore. It was coming from the stairs behind him. Something was descending. It moved with a sound like breaking branches, like bones being reset, like laughter filtered through dead leaves. Marcus couldn't see it, not clearly, not in a way his mind could process and accept. It was a shadow with too many angles, a shape that folded in on itself, a presence so ancient and hungry that the very air around it turned cold. And then it spoke. The voice came from everywhere at once, from the walls and the floor and the inside of his skull. It spoke his name, and it spoke his mother's name, and it spoke names that Marcus didn't recognize but somehow knew belonged to his ancestors, to generations of Whitmores who had stood in this very chamber and made their choice. The feeding had stopped for 3 days. The covenant had been broken. And now a price must be paid. Marcus ran. He scrambled up those stone steps faster than he had ever moved in his life, slamming the cellar door behind him and throwing his weight against it as the scratching resumed, louder now, angrier, the sound of something that had waited too long and would not wait any longer. He could feel the wood bulging beneath his back, could feel the cold seeping through, could hear his name being repeated over and over in that terrible voice. He didn't stop running until he reached the property line, until his feet crossed from the dirt onto the gravel of the county road. Behind him, the farmhouse stood silent against the moonlit sky, its windows dark, its secrets temporarily contained. But Marcus knew it wasn't over. He could feel it watching him from those dark windows, could feel its hunger reaching across the distance between them. The covenant had been broken, and now it would need to be restored, not through the old offerings of meat and blood, but through something more substantial, something that would satisfy decades of interrupted slumber. Marcus Whitmore drove back to Chicago that night. He quit his job the following week. And every night since, no matter where he goes, no matter how far he runs, he hears the scratching. It's getting louder. and it's getting closer. They say if you drive through Hollow Creek, Nebraska, you might see an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of town, a white crow painted on a rusted mailbox, and offerings left at the property line by neighbors who still believe in the old ways. They say if you listen closely at midnight, you can hear something scratching beneath the earth, waiting for its next meal. And they say if you're very, very unlucky, you might just receive a letter from a law firm in Grand Island, telling you that you've inherited something you never wanted, something you can never escape. Some inheritances come with conditions. Some debts can never be paid. And some things once awakened can never be put back to sleep. If this story sent a chill down your spine, if you felt that scratching at the edge of your own thoughts, then you know what to do. Drop a comment below and tell us, would you have opened that cellar door? Hit that like button if you want more tales from the dark corners of America, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who thinks they're brave enough to handle it. Because in the dark, we're all in this together. Until next time, sleep tight. And try not to listen too closely to the sounds beneath your floor.